Are you sure you're in the right place? The woman at the reception desk didn't whisper it quietly enough. Maya Brooks heard every word. She stood just outside the glass doors of the wedding hall, holding her silver heels in one hand while the evening wind moved gently across the grass beneath her bare feet. Inside, the music was soft, elegant. A string quartet playing something slow and expensive. The kind of music meant for people who believed the world had always belonged to them. Maya looked down at the dress she was wearing. Ivory satin. Her sister had chosen it herself. But the moment Maya arrived, the groom's mother tilted her head and said with a thin smile, "Interesting choice. I thought the bridesmaids would look more refined." 30 minutes later, the whispers had already spread across the reception. Who invited her? Is she really the bride's sister? She doesn't look like she belongs here. Maya had spent most of her life hearing that tone. Not loud. Not cruel enough to cause a scene. Just quiet enough to remind you exactly where people believed you stood. And 10 minutes ago, the groom's mother leaned close to Maya during the champagne toast and murmured, "You might want to step outside for the photos. Our guests expect a certain presentation." Presentation. That word sat heavy in Maya's chest. Because the truth was simple. She had worked 2 jobs for years helping her sister finish college. She paid the deposit for the very wedding hall glowing behind her now. But somehow tonight, she was the embarrassment. Maya stood in the parking lot, the sound of laughter spilling from the open doors behind her. She opened her phone slowly. Her thumb hovered over a name she hadn't touched in almost a year. Most people at the wedding thought Maya Brooks was just another guest. What they didn't know was that once, 2 years ago, on a rainy night outside a hospital in Busan, Maya had saved a stranger's life. And that stranger was a man whose name could silence entire rooms. She pressed the call button. The line rang once. Then a calm voice answered. "Maya." She swallowed. "I'm sorry to call like this." A pause. Not the kind where someone hesitates. The kind where someone is already standing up. What happened? She glanced back toward the glowing wedding hall. "They think I don't belong here." Another pause. Then his voice came back quieter, colder. "Stay where you are." "How long?" 15 minutes. The line went dead. Maya slipped the phone back into her purse and sat on the low stone wall beside the parking lot. Inside, the wedding music continued. Laughter. Champagne glasses clinking. No one inside had any idea what was about to happen. Because 15 minutes from now, 3 black cars would turn into that driveway. And when Choi Sung-min stepped out of the first one, the same people who mocked Maya Brooks would suddenly realize they had just humiliated the one woman, the most dangerous man in the city, would cross oceans to protect. The wedding had been called the event of the year long before the first guest arrived. People said it the way they say things that are meant to sound effortless, but everyone knew the truth. Nothing about this wedding had been effortless. Not the venue, not the guest list, not the towering arrangements of white orchids lining the marble entrance. Every detail had been polished until it reflected money. The estate sat on the edge of the city, where the skyline softened into hills. A long private driveway curved through manicured gardens before opening into a wide courtyard filled with luxury cars and uniformed attendants. When Maya Brooks stepped out of the rideshare that afternoon, the driver glanced at the venue and gave a low whistle. Someone important getting married here. Maya smiled politely and closed the door behind her. "My sister." The driver raised his eyebrows, impressed, before pulling away. For a moment, Maya stood there alone at the base of the grand staircase leading up to the hall. The building was all glass and stone, sunlight reflecting off its surface like water. Staff moved quickly across the courtyard carrying trays of flowers and crystal. Everything about the place felt enormous, expensive, carefully curated. Maya adjusted the small clutch in her hand and smoothed the front of her dress. The fabric was soft and pale, catching the light when she moved. Her sister had spent weeks choosing it. "You'll look beautiful in this," she had insisted during one of their late-night phone calls. And Maya believed her. Because despite everything, today wasn't about Maya. Today was about Alicia, her little sister. The girl Maya used to walk to school every morning, holding her hand at busy intersections. The girl who cried the first time she left home for college. The girl Maya had quietly supported through years of tuition payments and rent deposits when scholarships didn't stretch far enough. Alicia had always been the dreamer between them, and now she was marrying into a family that seemed to live inside those dreams. Maya climbed the stairs slowly, her heels clicking softly against the polished stone. Inside the reception hall, staff were still making final adjustments. A florist crouched beside a table centerpiece while two waiters carried silver trays toward the bar. The room itself looked like something pulled from a magazine. Crystal chandeliers hung high above the dance floor, scattering warm light across the space. Tall windows framed the gardens outside while round tables dressed in ivory linens stretched across the hall like quiet islands. Near the front, a massive arch of white roses stood ready for the ceremony. Maya paused just inside the doorway, taking it all in. She could already imagine Alicia walking down the aisle, her smile wide and unstoppable the way it had been since she was little. For a moment, pride warmed Maya's chest. Every long shift, every extra bill she covered, every sacrifice had led to this. Her sister's happiness. Maya stepped further into the hall, unaware of the curious glances beginning to follow her across the room. At the far end of the space, a group of sharply dressed guests had begun to whisper quietly among themselves. One woman leaned closer to another, her voice low but unmistakably curious. "Is that the bride's sister?" The other woman studied Maya for a moment before answering. "I suppose it must be." But the way she said it carried a question Maya hadn't heard yet. A question that, before the night was over, would change everything. Maya moved slowly through the reception hall, careful not to disturb the quiet rhythm of preparation happening around her. Staff hurried between tables, straightening napkins and adjusting silverware that already looked perfect. Somewhere near the back, someone tested a microphone, and the soft hum echoed briefly through the room. The wedding would begin in less than an hour. Guests had started arriving. The first wave came dressed in tailored suits and shimmering gowns that caught the chandelier light like glass. Their voices were low and confident, the relaxed conversations of people used to expensive places. Maya kept walking, offering small polite smiles when someone glanced her way. At first, the looks were quick, curious, but not unfriendly. Then something shifted. Two women standing near the champagne table paused their conversation as Maya passed. Their eyes followed her a little longer than necessary. One of them leaned closer to the other. Maya didn't hear the words, but she heard the tone. Soft. Speculative. The kind of whisper people use when they think they're being discreet. She kept moving. Near the center of the hall, a group of older guests stood beside one of the long floral displays. Their clothing was darker, more formal, their posture straight with quiet authority. The groom's family. Maya recognized them immediately from the rehearsal dinner the night before. They had the same composed expressions, the same careful smiles that never quite reached their eyes. As Maya approached, the conversation within the group slowed. A tall woman with silver earrings glanced at her first. Her gaze traveled slowly from Maya's hair to the hem of her dress, measuring something. Beside her, a man in a charcoal suit folded his arms. Another woman lifted her champagne glass and spoke under her breath. "Is that Alicia's sister?" The tall woman nodded slightly. "I believe so." There was a pause. Then the man spoke again, his voice barely above a murmur. "She's different from what I expected." The word hung there. Different. Not loud enough to challenge, but sharp enough to cut. Maya kept walking, her shoulders steady, though she could feel the air behind her shift as their quiet conversation continued. Across the room, more guests had begun arriving. Every few seconds the doors opened again, letting in a new wave of voices and perfume and polished shoes. And each time someone new entered, their eyes moved across the room. They admired the flowers, the tables, the towering wedding cake displayed near the center. And, eventually, their attention drifted toward Maya. Some looked only briefly. Others lingered, curiosity slowly turning into something else. It wasn't open hostility. Not yet. But Maya had learned long ago how to recognize the moment a room began deciding who belonged inside it. Near the far wall, two younger women were scrolling through their phones while waiting for drinks. One of them glanced up and nudged the other. "Hey," she whispered. "Isn't that the bride's sister?" The second woman looked over Maya carefully. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Huh. That single sound carried a quiet disbelief. Across the room, the tall woman with the silver earrings was still watching Maya. And after a moment, she turned toward the others in her group. "I should go introduce myself," she said calmly. Her heels clicked across the marble floor as she began walking toward Maya. Behind her, the whispers continued to spread softly through the hall, like the beginning of a storm no one had noticed yet. Maya had just reached the long table where the seating cards were arranged when she felt someone stop beside her. The air shifted in that subtle way it does when a person stands a little too close. She looked up. The tall woman with the silver earrings was standing there, her posture straight, her smile thin and practiced. Up close, she looked even more composed than before. Her dress was deep emerald silk, perfectly tailored, the kind of clothing that suggested both wealth and authority without ever needing to announce it. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. Then the woman extended a hand. "You must be Maya." Her voice was smooth, almost pleasant. Maya took the hand politely. "Yes. And you are?" "Mrs. Han." A pause followed, just long enough to establish the meaning behind the name. "The groom's mother." Maya gave a respectful nod. "It's nice to meet you." Mrs. Han's smile widened slightly, though her eyes stayed cool. "Yes," she said softly. "I've heard quite a bit about you." The way she said it made the sentence feel less like a compliment and more like a carefully wrapped observation. Maya released her hand and glanced back toward the rows of tables. "It's a beautiful venue," she said gently. "Alicia worked really hard planning everything." Mrs. Han followed her gaze briefly, scanning the room. "Yes, she did." Another pause. Then the woman turned her attention fully back to Maya. "And you're her sister?" It wasn't a question. "Yes." Mrs. Han tilted her head slightly, studying her in the same slow way she had earlier across the room. "I see." The silence stretched again, this time long enough for Maya to notice that two nearby guests had stopped pretending not to listen. Mrs. Han lowered her voice just slightly. "I hope you won't misunderstand what I'm about to say." That sentence alone carried the weight of something unpleasant approaching. Maya kept her expression calm. "All right." Mrs. Han gestured lightly toward the hall around them. "You see, my family takes great pride in presentation. Events like this are carefully curated." Her eyes moved briefly over Maya's dress again. "Guests expect a certain atmosphere." Maya felt the meaning before the words even arrived. Mrs. Han folded her hands neatly in front of her. "And while Alicia insisted you attend," she continued gently, "I'm simply trying to understand something." Maya waited. Mrs. Han's voice remained soft. "Why exactly are you here in such a visible role?" For a moment the sounds of the room seemed to fade. Maya blinked once. "I'm the bride's sister." "Yes," Mrs. Han replied smoothly. "Of course." Another small smile. "But weddings like this can be delicate occasions." The implication landed quietly, but unmistakably. Across the room, someone laughed loudly, the sound oddly distant. Maya held the woman's gaze. "I'm here to support my sister." Mrs. Han nodded slowly, as if considering that answer with polite patience. Then she leaned a little closer. Her voice dropped just enough that it felt private. "You must understand," she said, "some of our guests may find the situation confusing." Her eyes drifted briefly across Maya again. "Families are expected to reflect a certain standard." She straightened, smoothing the sleeve of her dress. "And tonight," she added calmly, "we're simply trying to maintain that standard." For a moment neither woman spoke. Then Mrs. Han offered one last composed smile. "I hope you won't take this personally." But the way several nearby guests had gone very quiet made one thing painfully clear. It was already personal. The ceremony passed in a blur of music and applause. Maya stood near the second row of chairs as Alicia walked down the aisle, her veil catching the afternoon light pouring through the tall windows. For a moment, everything felt simple again. The whispers were gone. The tension had faded beneath the soft violin music and the quiet emotion of the vows. When Alicia said, "I do," the entire hall filled with cheers. Maya clapped with everyone else, her chest warm with pride. Her sister looked happy. Truly happy. And for a while, that was enough. By the time the reception began, the hall had transformed again. The lights dimmed slightly, waiters moved gracefully between tables with trays of champagne, and the towering wedding cake gleamed beneath a ring of soft golden lights. Guests gathered around the dance floor, their voices louder now, relaxed with celebration. Maya had just stepped toward the refreshment table when she heard someone call out clearly across the room. "Before we begin the family photographs." It was Mrs. Hahn. The groom's mother stood near the front of the hall beside the photographer, her posture poised as always. Could the immediate families please come forward? Chairs shifted as people stood. The groom joined his parents near the arch of white roses. Alicia followed, lifting her dress carefully as she moved into place beside them. The photographer began arranging everyone with quick, practiced instructions. Parents closer together, yes, perfect. Bride and groom in the center. Maya walked forward quietly, assuming her place would be beside Alicia, as promised. But just as she stepped into the edge of the gathering, Mrs. Hahn raised a gentle hand. "Ah, one moment." The photographer paused. Several guests nearby turned their heads, curious. Mrs. Hahn smiled politely at Maya. "It might be better," she said calmly, "if you stepped aside for this photo." For a second, Maya thought she had misheard. "I'm the bride's sister," she replied softly. "Yes, of course," Mrs. Hahn said smoothly. "But this particular photograph is for the groom's immediate family." A few murmurs moved through the guests, watching nearby. The photographer glanced awkwardly between them. Maya's eyes shifted to Alicia. Her sister stood frozen for a moment, caught between two families. "Maya should be in the picture," Alicia said carefully. Mrs. Hahn's smile didn't falter. "Perhaps in the next one," she replied lightly. "But this photo will be displayed at our family home. It's simply a matter of tradition." The word tradition settled heavily in the air. Around them, several guests had stopped pretending not to watch. Maya felt every eye in the room. Mrs. Hahn leaned slightly closer, her voice lowering just enough to sound polite. "You understand, I'm sure." Maya looked again at Alicia. Her sister's lips parted slightly, as if she might say something. But no words came. The photographer cleared his throat. "Shall we continue?" Mrs. Hahn gave a small nod. "Yes." Then she turned back toward Maya with that same composed expression. "If you wouldn't mind stepping aside." For a moment the entire room seemed very quiet. Then someone near the back whispered something that caused a ripple of restrained laughter. Maya felt the heat rise slowly in her chest. Not anger. Something heavier. The quiet realization that this humiliation wasn't accidental. It had been carefully arranged. And she was standing at the center of it. For a moment Maya didn't move. The photographer adjusted his camera lens, pretending to focus on the people already standing beneath the arch of white roses. Guests nearby shifted quietly, their curiosity now fully awake. Maya could feel the weight of their attention pressing against her back. Across the room someone lifted a phone, pretending to check messages, while clearly watching the scene unfold. Mrs. Hahn waited with that same patient smile, as if the situation were perfectly reasonable. As if asking a woman to step out of her own sister's wedding photograph were nothing more than polite housekeeping. Maya's eyes drifted once more to Alicia. Her sister stood between her new husband and his family, the white lace of her dress glowing beneath the chandeliers. For a brief second their eyes met. Alicia looked conflicted.
"Guilty."
But she didn't move. The silence stretched long enough that the photographer finally spoke again. "Maybe we can take this one quickly," he said, trying to lighten the tension. "Then we'll bring everyone else in." Maya nodded slowly. "Of course."
Her voice was calm. Too calm.
She stepped back from the group, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor as she turned away from the arch. The room seemed to breathe again the moment she moved. Behind her, The photographer began arranging the group once more. Closer together. Yes, that's perfect. The camera's shutter clicked. Maya walked through the reception hall without looking back. The laughter resumed behind her. Glasses clinked again. The music returned to its gentle background melody. But each step toward the exit felt heavier than the last. When she pushed open the glass doors, the cool evening air rushed against her skin. Outside, the gardens were quiet. Lanterns lined the pathways, their soft light glowing across the trimmed grass and stone walkways. The distant hum of the city floated faintly beyond the estate walls. Maya stepped down the staircase and crossed the courtyard until she reached the low stone barrier near the edge of the parking lot. Only then did she sit. For a few seconds, she simply stared at the ground. The muffled music from inside drifted through the open doors behind her. Somewhere inside that glowing hall, her sister was smiling for photographs. And Maya had just been erased from one of them. Slowly, she slipped off her heels and placed them beside her on the stone. The cool grass brushed against her bare feet. Then she opened her purse and took out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment. There was a name there she hadn't touched in almost a year. A name she had promised herself she would never need again. Choi Sung-min. The last time they spoke had been on a rainy night in Busan. A stranger bleeding in an alley. A promise made quietly under hospital lights. If you ever need help, call me. Maya stared at the name for several seconds. Inside the hall behind her, applause suddenly erupted again. Another toast. Another celebration. She exhaled slowly. Then she pressed the call button. The line rang once. Just once. Then a calm voice answered. Maya. Her throat tightened slightly, but her voice remained steady. I didn't want to ask, she said quietly. There was a brief silence on the other end. Not hesitation. Recognition. What happened? Maya glanced back toward the glowing wedding hall. They think I don't belong here. Another pause followed. This one colder. When Sung-min spoke again, his voice had changed. Where are you? In the parking lot. I see it. A door slammed faintly somewhere in the distance on his side of the line. Stay where you are. Maya blinked. How long? 15 minutes. The line went silent. Maya lowered the phone slowly, staring out at the quiet driveway stretching toward the front gates. Inside the wedding hall, no one had noticed anything yet. But 15 minutes from now, everything was going to change. The night had settled quietly over the estate. From where Maya sat on the low stone barrier, the wedding hall glowed behind her like a glass lantern. Music drifted through the open doors, soft piano now, slower than before. Laughter rose and fell in waves as the reception continued inside, unaware of the silence outside. She checked the time on her phone. 9 minutes. The driveway stretched out in front of her, a long curve disappearing between tall hedges and iron gates at the far end. Lanterns along the path cast warm circles of light across the pavement. For a while, nothing moved. A waiter stepped outside briefly with a tray of empty glasses, glanced at Maya with mild curiosity, then returned inside without a word. Somewhere farther down the gardens, a fountain trickled steadily. Maya let her hands rest loosely in her lap. Part of her wondered if she had made a mistake. It had been nearly 2 years since she last saw Choi Sung-min. 2 years since the night she had driven a wounded stranger to a hospital in Busan after finding him collapsed beside the road. Back then, she hadn't known who he was. She had only known he needed help. By the time she discovered the truth, that the quiet man she'd helped was connected to one of the most powerful criminal networks in Korea, it was already too late for distance. He had given her his number with a simple promise. If you ever need help, call. She had never used it. Until tonight. Maya glanced back toward the hall. Through the tall windows, she could see silhouettes moving across the dance floor. Alicia stood near one of the tables now, laughing at something the groom had said. For a moment, Maya felt a familiar ache in her chest. She had wanted tonight to be simple. Just one evening where everything stayed peaceful. Then a faint sound carried through the quiet driveway. An engine.
Low. Smooth.
Maya turned her head. At first, it was only headlights appearing beyond the iron gates, white beams cutting through the darkness as the gates slowly swung open. A black sedan rolled through first.
Long. Polished.
The kind of car that moved with quiet authority. It traveled slowly up the driveway toward the courtyard. Then a second set of headlights appeared behind it. Another black car. And behind that, a third. The three vehicles moved together in perfect silence, their dark bodies reflecting the lantern light as they curved along the driveway. Inside the reception hall, a few guests near the windows began to notice. Someone paused mid-conversation. Another guest turned their head. "What's that?" a woman asked faintly from inside. The first car pulled into the courtyard and came to a smooth stop near the staircase. The second car followed, parking just behind it. Then the third. Engines shut off one by one. For a moment, the entire courtyard was still. Maya slowly stood from the stone barrier, her heels still resting beside her. Inside the hall, several guests had now gathered near the windows, their curiosity pulling them closer. The driver of the first car stepped out and walked around to the back door. He opened it without speaking. For a second, nothing happened. Then a polished black shoe touched the pavement. A tall man stepped out of the car. His dark coat moved slightly in the night breeze as he straightened. Choi Sung-min lifted his gaze toward the glowing wedding hall. Then his eyes found Maya. And in that quiet moment, the night shifted. For a moment, neither of them moved. The courtyard lights reflected softly off the polished surface of the black cars as Choi Sung-min closed the door behind him. The driver stepped back immediately, giving him space. Maya had not seen him in almost 2 years. Yet he looked almost exactly the same.
Tall. Composed.
Dressed in a dark tailored coat that moved slightly in the evening breeze. But there was something else now, something heavier in the stillness around him. The quiet gravity of a man used to walking into rooms that changed the moment he arrived. His eyes stayed on Maya as he crossed the courtyard. When he reached her, his voice was calm. "You called." It wasn't a question. Maya nodded slightly. "I'm sorry." "You don't apologize for needing help," he replied. For a second his gaze moved over her face, studying her carefully. Then he glanced toward the glowing wedding hall. "That's where it happened." "Yes." Another pause. From inside the building, several guests had now gathered by the windows, watching the unfamiliar cars in the courtyard. Curiosity had turned into unease. Sung-min noticed. Without another word, he turned toward the staircase. Maya hesitated. "You don't have to," but he had already started walking. She picked up her heels and followed. The glass doors opened before they reached them. A staff member who had rushed forward to investigate the unexpected arrival froze the moment he saw Sung-min's expression. "Good evening, sir," the man said uncertainly. Sung-min walked past him without answering. The music inside the reception hall slowed as people began noticing the sudden shift in the room. Conversations faded. Dozens of heads turned. 3 unfamiliar men had entered the wedding. One of them walked with the quiet certainty of someone who did not need permission to be anywhere. Behind him, Maya stepped inside. A murmur spread through the guests. "That's her. Is that the sister? Who is that with her?" Near the center of the hall, Mrs. Han looked up from her conversation, just as Sung-min stopped a few feet away. For a moment, neither spoke. The groom's mother studied him carefully. "I'm afraid the reception is a private event," she said politely. Sung-min's expression didn't change. "I know." His voice was quiet, but it carried easily across the suddenly silent room. Mrs. Han glanced briefly at Maya standing behind him. Understanding flickered in her eyes. "And you are?" Sung-min looked directly at her. "My name is Choi Sung-min." The name meant nothing to some of the guests. But to others, the reaction was immediate. A man near the bar stiffened. Another guest whispered sharply to the person beside him. Mrs. Han's polite smile tightened slightly. "Well, Mr. Choi," she said carefully, "if you're looking for the couple, the ceremony has already." "I'm not here for the ceremony." His gaze shifted slowly across the room. Over the guests. The photographer. The arch of white roses where Maya had been told to step aside. Then his eyes returned to Mrs. Han. "I'm here," he said evenly, "because someone in this room thought it was acceptable to humiliate Maya Brooks." The silence deepened. No one laughed now. No one whispered. Sungmin took one small step forward. His voice lowered just slightly. So, I'd like to know something. His eyes locked on Mrs. Han. Who decided she didn't belong here? For several long seconds, no one answered. The silence inside the reception hall had become something heavy, pressing down on every guest in the room. Even the music had stopped. Somewhere near the back, a waiter stood frozen with a tray of champagne glasses, unsure whether to move or disappear. Mrs. Han held Sungmin's gaze, but the confidence that had once rested easily in her expression had begun to thin. "This is highly inappropriate," she said finally, her voice still composed, though tighter now. "You're interrupting a private family celebration." Sungmin didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I asked a simple question. His eyes shifted briefly across the room. Over the photographer. Over the group that had laughed moments earlier. Then they settled once more on Mrs. Han. Who told her she didn't belong here? The guests standing nearby avoided looking directly at Maya now. Some studied the floor. Others suddenly found their phones very interesting. Across the room, Alicia stood beside her husband, her face pale with confusion. "Maya," she called softly. Maya felt the weight of the moment pressing in from every direction. For the first time since stepping back into the hall, she spoke. "It's all right."
Her voice was calm.
Sungmin turned slightly toward her. "You called me?" "Yes." Maya stepped forward until she stood beside him instead of behind him. The entire room watched. "I didn't call you for revenge," she said quietly. Sungmin studied her face for a moment. Then he nodded once. Understanding. Maya turned toward the guests. Toward Mrs. Han. Toward the arch of white roses where she had been told to step aside. "I came here tonight to celebrate my sister," she said. Her voice didn't shake. But somewhere along the way, that stopped being possible. No one interrupted. Even Mrs. Han remained silent. Maya glanced briefly toward Alicia. There was sadness there. But something else too.
Clarity.
"You deserve to enjoy your wedding," Maya told her gently. "But I deserve to exist in a room without being treated like a problem." Alicia's lips parted as if she might protest. But the words didn't come. Maya looked back toward Sungmin. "I think I've stayed long enough." For a moment he didn't move. Then he stepped aside slightly, giving her the path toward the door. The gesture was quiet, respectful. Maya walked across the hall slowly. The same room that had once felt filled with whispers now stood completely silent as she passed. No one stopped her. No one spoke. When she reached the glass doors, the cool night air rushed in as she pushed them open. Outside, the courtyard looked the same as before. Lanterns glowing. The 3 black cars waiting quietly. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Sungmin stepped out beside her, the doors closing softly behind them. For a moment they stood there in the quiet. Then Maya exhaled, the tension she had carried all evening finally loosening from her shoulders. "I thought tonight would break me," she said softly. Sungmin looked at her. But Maya glanced back at the glowing wedding hall one last time. But it didn't. She slipped her heels back on and straightened. For the first time that evening, her smile came easily. Not because the night had gone the way she wanted, but because she had finally done something she had never allowed herself to do before. She had chosen herself. Sungmin opened the car door. And without looking back again, Maya Brooks stepped forward into the life waiting beyond that courtyard.